Day 25. The creature continues to sleep. Oh, hi friends. Didn't observe you there. Today, Vienne, my not-so-scientist friend who once turned a person into a leaf and then back again, is coming over to chat with us about, you guessed it, science. Better get in my field notes quick before she gets here. He continues to slumber all through the day. Hello? That must be Vienne. Come in.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a gift for you.
Oh, thank you. It's a rubber duck. I love rubber ducks. Keep him here. There you go.
Thank
Paper's
you.
just inside. Oh my goodness. I wore my scientist glasses for...
They're very nice.
Thank you.
I really like them.
They're just for observations, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Gotta observe while you're wearing the scientist glasses.
Do they make you see better?
Yeah, it's like you can like zoom in. I really feel like, yeah, I see everything scientifically, you know? It's
Okay.
like, this is my subject, and yeah, I'm seeing all of his habits and so on.
That's
anyway, cool. Yeah. So, Vienne, if I say the word puddle to you, does it remind you of anything from when you were a kid?
Yeah. Like, you know how kids, after it rains, like all the worms start coming out, and then kids always like grab them and like throw them in puddles and see what happens. And it was always that kid that was like, guys.
I love a worm.
I was like, guys, imagine if you were like taken away by a giant and thrown into a giant lake. How would you feel about that? And I was like, stop doing that to the worms.
Young worm activist.
And then so there was one day that it was raining, and I saw these worms that were like just laying out on the sidewalk or whatever. I can't remember where it was. And I was like, I gotta save these these worms from these puddles. So I grabbed them, but then I didn't know where to put them. So I just stuffed them in the pockets of my raincoat. And picture like very much like that bright yellow rubber type raincoat.
Yes,
yeah.
You were a cartoon as a child.
So I put them in the pockets of my raincoat, and then like my mom picked me up and drove me home. And as soon as I got home, I was like, "Oh, Mom, I forgot to tell you, but I have these worms in my pockets." And she was like, "Oh my God, Vienne, what are you doing? Take them out of your pockets right now." And she was like, "Put them in my garden, like just put them there." So I just threw them on like our side garden area. And it was in the spring, and my mom has continuously said that her tulips have never grown as well as that spring.
I mean, yeah, you had like a whole colony of I was gonna say ants, worms. Okay, so the reason why I invited you over is to chat about how you play in science, because you're a big old scientist.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay, fine. You're a big old sort of scientist.
Sort of scientist. I'll take that.
So tell me how you played in or with science as a kid.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that like, I mean, science is just answering questions about like how life works, right? So I think as a kid, you're constantly doing that. You're trying to figure out like how things work and like what certain things do, and you just have all these questions. And so I think growing up, my parents were very good at like letting me explore the world that way. So it was just a lot of like, well, like in the kitchen using all of these different like foods and stuff, and like crushing up cereal and then mixing it. And I would ask my mom like, oh, can I like try using this food in this way and like seeing what it'll do? And she'd be like, yeah, of course.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Or like playing with my parents were very big on gardening and growing things. And so I was like, well, I want to have a plant and I want to see if I can like take care of it and see what it does. Or I would like pick things up in the park and be like, can I just plant this and see what happens? So it was a lot of that, of just trying different things and see what it leads to.
Yeah. So it was like a curiosity thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Then your parents like enabled too.
I think they definitely made it easier.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What cereals did you mix up? I want to know. I feel like this is like a secret recipe that's actually really good, and I want to try.
Oh, I meant more like, well, right now I like combining different types of cereals and like eating them together, but I meant more like I would take Rice Krispies and like crush it up until it became kind of like a flour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then mixing it and like seeing what happens. Or even like, you know how at the end of cereal bags get like the crumbs and stuff? So taking that and then mixing it with water or with milk. And
I see. So it's more about like material changes.
Yeah.
Not like taste testing.
No.
I see. No. That's cool though.
Yeah.
My brother used to make, they called it like witch's soup.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just like truly like mud and water and sticks and
no.
Yeah. I don't think anyone ate it.
Yeah, I hope not.
But
I mean, people like mud cake is a very common thing with kids.
Yeah, you know? Yeah. My cousin ate dirt. I think she also tried to eat her own poop. I think that's the thing that happened.
Oh, cool.
I'm not naming any names.
I mean, hey, curiosity, right? Like, you want to answer this question you have in your head, and the only way to do it is to try.
There has to be a limit to that philosophy. I feel like that's where
I mean, yeah. If you're gonna put yourself, your own health in danger, maybe that's where you should draw the limit.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with this science writer, Rose Eveleth, and she was talking about how she didn't come up with this, but how like she feels like certain like tech people and stuff, like, or even like scientists who are not schooled in ethics don't ask themselves the questions like the question, should I do this? Like, they're more just like, we should figure out if like it's possible to create a robot that kills people.
Let's just do it.
But it's like, but should you do it? Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, hopefully more people are asking themselves that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you feel like coloring.
Oh, yeah.
It's just there.
Okay, cool.
You don't have to though. Just if you feel like it. Yeah. I'm curious if you think like science is like a good way of structuring curiosity, or like how science is related to curiosity for you.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think curiosity shouldn't be structured, you know, like other than like you were saying, the question of like, should you be doing something if it's gonna like harm,
like ethically,
harm someone or something. Then of course like that's kind of where you should put a limit. But I think otherwise, science in like the way that it's like traditionally conventionally done can be limiting, because then you have to follow like certain rules about doing certain things, and it has to be very structured and approved for you to actually be able to like do what you want to do.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about like how science's notion of truth has like affected how I understand certain things about myself to be true.
Yeah.
Like the idea in science that like, and obviously this is important for research, but like the idea that like in order for something to be true, it has to be replicable. And like what implications that has on like how you understand yourself and like how people change in ways that are not replicable and are more dynamic.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
That?
Yeah. I mean, like the replication crisis in psychology was like such a huge thing because people basically found that like almost nothing was replicable. But yeah, that does bring up a good question because especially for psychology, like people are so variable. And especially with like just in terms of like time and like where society is at certain moments in time, inevitably you're going to get changes.
Yeah, because the people who are studying whatever thing have their biases of the time. I'm just going to grab my dog.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not fair. I don't have opposable thumbs. This activity is not something that I can be included in.
Hey, Toby, tons of people can draw with their mouths.
That's true. Be like the elephants and the gorillas. No, gorillas can draw with their hands. What am I saying? I just always think of him when I see gorillas. Just anytime I see like an animal with black hair, I think of my dog. Or like black feathers even.
Wow, that's a lot of...
Most animals, I'm like, is that my dog?
See a giant black bear. Is that my dog? Should I get closer?
Well, I feel like it's like partially because I used to always say that like, or I still say this, but like whenever he sees an animal, I just picture that he always thinks everything is a dog.
Aww.
And maybe I'm projecting because I clearly also think everything is a dog.
Does he just want to be their friend? Is that...
I just think he like, I don't know, I just picture him being like, seeing like a moose and being like, that's a very big dog, you know?
Yeah.
Or like, that dog smells kind of funny. Like he definitely does no understanding of like...
Of other...
Like animal taxonomy, you know what I mean?
But do you think he recognizes humans as like humans then? So it's just like humans and dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think humans, he would differentiate.
Right,
but like,
right.
Yeah.
The world is just made up of humans and other Tobys.
That's really all there is. Yeah, that's my personal philosophy on, on,
makes sense.
On life on Earth.
That's good science.
Yeah. Tell me about how you play in science now.
Well, so right now, I think the biggest way that I play in science is I'm part of this organization that's called SciComm Collective, and so we do science communication, and that's focused a lot on EDI, which is equity, diversity, and integrity. So we try to find a lot of like more marginalized voices and that kind of stuff. So we try to get away from the traditional straight white male scientists. And then also, like, a big part of SciComm is communicating science, but through different mediums. And so especially going towards arts and, like, visual arts or even, like, different types of written things, like creative writing or poetry, and using that to communicate science, I think is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, something that I, like, think about a lot and, like, especially wonder if it could work within, like, how science has been, like, made is, like, yeah, like, extra, like, hetero white patriarchal ways of coming to know things. I wonder, like, do you think that it's possible within, like, science as we know it right now to, like, inject those? Or do you feel like there are certain things that we need to, like, I don't know,
break down first?
Yeah, or just, like, switch out something else for?
I think it's very hard to change, like, the traditional, like, method of science of, like, the question and hypothesis and, like, experimentation and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I feel like it's so ingrained.
Yeah.
I kind of have a hard time seeing it changing.
It's almost hard to imagine like what the alternative would even be.
Yeah. And I know that, like, I wrote this article about the philosophy of science, especially from like a feminist perspective, and different ways to look at science, and the idea that like science is supposed to be extremely objective. And these articles were suggesting it, like looking at it from a different perspective and like embracing the subjectivity of science. But those things were written like all the way back in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Right.
And I feel like, I don't know, it feels like science is very rigid right now. I don't see, and I guess that maybe that's very pessimistic, but it's hard to see what would need to change. Like there would have to be a complete like change of
like paradigm.
Like a complete paradigm shift of how we even look at science and how everyone looks at science. Because I think the idea that science is very objective is extremely like, that's what everyone thinks almost.
Yeah. Maybe one way of like answering the question is like thinking of science and like the scientific method and that way of like acquiring knowledge as like one tool, but not like the hegemonic tool for like, or like the superior tool for like understanding the world.
Scientists would have to come to an agreement that change is important. And I don't know if that's going to happen. Like I think people are becoming more open-minded and flexible with about the idea of like what science can be. But I think that kind of like open-mindedness and flexibility happens faster in social sciences and arts rather than like pure sciences.
Do you feel like science has affected how you understand yourself in any kind of way?
Ooh. I mean, I think, like, I do, when you said that, when you introduced me as, like, a scientist. And, like, I was like, no, I'm not really a scientist. But I still, like, I still feel like science is a big part of, like, my identity, just in terms of, like, having accumulated all this knowledge that I have about science-y things, and being very passionate about it. Like I like talking about science, and especially my field of like biology, but then more specifically genetics. So I think it hasn't affected it's affected my identity more in the sense of like I identify myself as someone who really likes science and who is in science.
What about genetics is so mesmerizing to you?
I think that actually took me a while to figure out, because like it kind of always had an immediate appeal to me, especially like when I first directly encountered genetics in Cégep, and I liked it right away. But I think it's because, for the same reason I like psychology, it kind of tries to understand what makes a person, like at the root, you know? Like psychology is that you try to understand like what makes a person who they are, why they behave certain ways. And genetics is sort of the same, except it looks at the like molecular aspect of it. So like all of these letters that you have in your cells somehow make you the entire like complete human being that you are. And I find that super interesting because then like super small changes in that information can lead to huge changes in like your person. And I think that's super interesting.
And it's like, I feel like what's cool about science as it relates to curiosity is that it like, it makes things feel like there are there are answers.
Yeah.
You know?
It's true.
Yeah.
It's always exciting. And then the answers are also like so often like mind-blowing. You're like, oh my God.
Right. Yeah, because you're like discovering the mystery of life and you're like, what?
Yeah.
We have all these weird like curvy ladders.
Twisted ladders. Yeah.
Sorry. The technical term is a twisted ladder.
That's the real sense.
Oh man.
Now you can use that, Mimi.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, twisted, yeah. That makes sense. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is such a like compelling thing to be like, what, like these, especially because we like describe the acids as like letters. So just to see like letters of the alphabet describing like a phenotype, or I guess a genotype that becomes a phenotype that becomes like your fingernail, and you're like, what?
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, and then like, I mean, there's like so many things to think about in terms of like everything that's being coded by your genes, and it's fascinating to think about how like a person is so complicated and like there's so many parts to it. And it all comes down to like those molecules. And obviously, so like that's all just like in your cells and stuff, which is why then like psychology comes in.
Totally.
And I kind of look at it like nature versus nurture. Yeah. You know, part of it is what you have inherently, but then obviously the way that you're raised and all of the situations that you face throughout your life. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Because also they're figuring out that like a lot of genes are like epigenetic too.
Yeah,
right?
that's like super cool.
Yeah. So it's like it's both.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
Like nurture.
And like, I mean, there's also a lot of stuff we're learning in genetics that like breaks down the traditional perspective of genes being like predetermined and like once it's set, it's set. Totally. But like even things that affect your like grandparents will have impacts on your genetics later on.
Yeah, totally. Like the stuff about like intergenerational trauma, like actually being trackable.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think that's super interesting.
Yeah. You said earlier, like, what you love about it is it's like, it tells you like what makes a person. So I want to like ask you this, but in a very like blobby way. What makes a person?
I mean, like I was saying, I think like I've said this with friends before, but like every person is like has like a whole universe inside of them, and it's wild to think about like how complicated a person is. And so like what makes an entire person is, of course, there's like the biology and just the physical concrete like body, but then what is super fascinating is all the stuff that happens in your head, and so like I think that's what makes up a person, like the complicated jumble of uniqueness of stuff that's in your head and all of the accumulated experiences that you've had, which affect your biology and your psychology, and then also like all the experiences generationally accumulated. So like a person is made up by like an entire history of other people that's reflected in like your psychology and your biology.
So like a person is an accumulation of like everything that doesn't make sense.
They're like an accumulation of their like family history and their own history. And they're like constantly changing too. So like a person is just who they are at that moment, but then that will also change.
That feels good to hear that from a geneticist. You know?
Yeah, because like even people, like I was saying, people think of genetics as being, your genes as being something that's set in stone, but that's not true. Like that also changes. So you're never completely set in stone. Yeah. I think that's a reassuring thought too.
Yeah. Even though you can like look at the letters that make you up, like that doesn't mean that we've like distilled what a person is.
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely not. Yeah. Even if you think about there's, I don't know if you heard about the Human Genetic Project. Yeah, that was like a thing done. I think they finished it in 2011 or something, and they wanted to basically have a complete sequence, like a standard human DNA sequence. And it ended up being sort of a flop because that doesn't really give us much information about like people and humans in general. Yeah. It's just like a bunch of letters, but we haven't been able to do that much with it.
And also it was like, or from what I know about it, the other reason why it was like so criticized too was because like the idea of like a standard human is so tied up with these preconceptions we have about like what a generic person even is. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And like one of the like lead researchers on one of the, I think there were like multiple projects going on that made up that, but like one of them, like they used his genetic sequence.
Really?
Yeah. Which like,
oh my God.
That one wasn't something that people were like necessarily angry about, but they were like, you're so lame. Like,
yeah.
Like, really, dude?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I had no idea. Oh, God. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. That's, again, is science really objective? No. There's like a bunch of factors that influence it.
Yeah. Like, like even something that like colloquially we call a genetic mutation. Like we are genetic mutations.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? Like evolution is just genetic mutation. But like the connotation now is like pejorative, right? It's like, oh, this is a negative thing to differ from the general population.
Totally. I mean, we've talked about that in my genetics class also of like, well, it's hard to identify the boundaries between like what would you consider a genetic mutation versus just like a rare variant versus an allele, which is something that's extremely common. And it's just in terms of frequency, but there's no saying like what kind of frequency determines like which category it falls into. It's just a kind of like perspective. Yeah.
Because we all have wisdom teeth, but they're not like aren't those like genetic like kind of like,
I mean, they're like kind of useless.
They're useless, right? Yeah. Okay.
I wonder if there's probably people who have like the genetic mutation of not having wisdom teeth. And they're probably like...
Probably.
Right? Because that's sort of where it's headed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to meet someone who didn't have them.
I bet they're around. And they're vastly superior. I mean, I can't imagine how much energy their body is saving by not growing
creating these useless teeth
that we have to get out of our mouths anyways.
I'm really sad because I didn't get to keep mine. They didn't even ask.
Really?
I would have kept them.
I don't know if they asked me if I could keep mine. I think I would have kept mine also.
Yeah.
Whatever. Did you get them like ripped out or like surgically removed?
They were surgically removed because they were like on a one-way ticket to like ruin all my teeth town. Oh. So they were like, we're gonna take these out sooner than not.
Fair. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your like genetic superpower?
Oh my gosh.
That makes you superior to all other people? Do you know what I'm referring to?
I know exactly what you're referring to. To be fair, it's not like just me.
Yes.
This genetic variation is especially common in like Asian populations, especially I think it's like in 99% of Japanese people, and like 90-something% of Vietnamese people. But so people who have dry earwax, which is my case, it's the same. It's caused by the same gene that will make us not have body odor. So like when I sweat, there's no odor because there's like some enzyme that if it like attracts a certain bacteria that smells, and so like I apparently don't have that enzyme, and that's also linked to having dry earwax. But yeah, so I don't smell, and I thought for the longest time that like maybe I just couldn't smell myself, and I wasn't sure. But then I looked it up, and it was like, no, it's like an actual genetic variation where like people just don't have any body odor. I know. A lot.
So as a stinky person who got over the stinkiness by being like, oh, it happens to everyone, then I met Vianne, and
I'm so sorry.
Now I'm just stinky and gross.
But you're the common, like you're like most people. Are stinky when they sweat. I get through like it takes me forever to get through deodorant. I like use it if
it's a mood, right?
Yeah, it's just a mood. And then I asked my cousins too, because like I figured a few of them would have that, and some of them were like, oh my god, yeah, I feel the same about deodorant. I just like use it whenever I feel like it. But
it's kind of sad that like no one told you.
Well,
like,
but
I feel like someone should know and be like, hey,
I feel
you
like
might not need
so
this,
few people
but,
know.
Yeah.
Like, it was such a surprise, and I guess maybe more people know in like Asian countries, but especially here, it's probably just assumed that everyone is smelly.
But like that's the thing. Again, like calling back to like the Human Genome Project, etc. Like those were probably, I don't know, but they were probably like mostly white people that they were tracking or whatever. So like. Probably there are like a ton of geneticists that don't even know about this.
Yeah.
Because
probably.
It's just not a population they study.
Yeah. I've been talking about that a lot, especially through the SciComm collective of like how a lot of research projects, especially related to medicine or even like car crash dummies.
Yeah.
The default is always like white male. But then, so there's a bunch of like medical treatments and like medication that the dosage is optimized for white male bodies. And then since that's like the industry standard, that's just what we go with. But that doesn't make it an effective treatment for other types of bodies. So that's super interesting. But it's also interesting because then where genetics can come in, we can start having personalized medicine where we can use like people's genetic information and like see what kind of variants they have in their DNA and then adapt the medication to that rather than like just use a standard.
That's so cool.
It's super cool.
That reminds me of like an interview I heard once with a tailor who would like tell her clients, it's not you, it's the clothes. So it's like in the same way, it's like genetic tailoring where it's like you are the standard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, like hopefully that's where things go towards because then you can have treatments that actually work for people rather than like you just like cross your fingers and like, well, it works for this like white dude.
Oh gosh.
So like we'll see how it works for you and then we'll like go from there.
Yeah, and then the like terrible flip side where it's like probably they'll never make birth control for men.
Oh yeah.
Because they have done trials and then they're like, oh, no, this is not something we can put on the market because it causes weight gain, depression, like low libido.
Yeah.
Like all these things that are the
super common
like
for
accepted
women.
side effects of like everyone else who uses birth control. Anyway.
Yeah. But exactly, like that's the kind of stuff that I hope changes in science and just changing those standards that we have because people so easily default to like even just with like experiments using animals. It's like, oh well, like the male animals are the standard, so we're just going to keep on using the default, and then it sort of perpetuates a cycle of like, well, we can't do research with females because there's no research to back it up, so we can't like build it on top of anything, so we just keep on having to use the default.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never heard it phrased in that way where it's like we can't change the way that we research because there's no precedent to like compare it to.
Whoa. It's a super common problem. Exactly. So like I think even for people who try to do it differently, they struggle a lot because there's exactly nothing to back it up. Even using different, like using male and female samples, or just like a larger variation instead of having just like one, is really hard to get approved, because people are like, well, like it's gonna give too much variation in your data or whatever.
Yeah.
And we don't want variation in our data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's go for an easier one. If your hair could be made out of any plant, which plant would it be?
I think algae.
Why?
I really like the water.
Cool. So are you like chilling with your hair at the surface and your legs are like dangling into the, like, are you living underwater if this is the case?
If I have like algae hair?
Yeah.
I was kind of, if I was living underwater, I'd be like moving around and stuff, and like,
okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't just be like hanging in one place.
But algae has to live at the surface, right? No?
No.
There are like algae that are like deeper down?
Yeah, at the bottom. Yeah, totally.
Oh, even at the bottom?
Yeah, like think about like seaweed. It grows out like...
Is that an algae?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Are there like non-photosynthetic algae? Like, are there ones that don't need light? Do you know?
I don't know. I think like at the very deep bottom, there's probably not much algae.
Yeah.
But I was thinking more in terms of like lakes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a fun fact for you.
Please
tell me. Do you know the difference between a pond and a lake?
I mean, I thought it was just the size, but...
Yeah. So like, oftentimes the size corresponds to the actual like way that they differentiate, and this is like in like limnology, the study of bodies of water. So it's like for the people.
Did you hear this from ologies?
No, this is like I looked this up at some point because I was like, it had like not like actively haunted me, but like medium haunted me for many years, like since I was a child, and like
the question of ponds versus lakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why. It's just like something that I was always like.
I mean,
like,
it's true. It doesn't make sense.
Like, what is a pond? I was just like, I didn't understand what a pond was.
I agree. Like, I would kind of just picture ponds as puddles then, because some lakes were very small, but then you're like, well, but it's a puddle. Like, what makes it? Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. So there are like definitely like general size differences. Okay. Because the way that they differentiate between them is actually how deep they go. So a pond only has photosynthetic, or like the light has to be able to reach the bottom of a pond.
Okay.
That's the difference basically.
Okay.
And then like a lake will be deeper than that.
Oh, so it's not like size like this, but it's
like, because I've seen like huge ponds. I'm like, how is this not a lake?
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
That actually is a very fun fact.
It's so good.
Thank you.
I know. And it's like something where, at least for me, because I had this mild haunting for so long, every time I remember it, it's such a relief. Which is, that's what science does.
Yeah.
Do you know? It's like, there are answers.
There are answers. And sometimes there's not. And that's okay too.
That's also okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But something about like knowing that there's a way of setting out to figure out an answer.
Yeah.
Like there's a way of asking, I guess.
Yeah. And I think like anything you do to like set out to answer whatever question you have, like that counts as science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is science.
Yeah. Exactly. You don't need to follow like rules or whatever. Okay.
I'm gonna get personal with you for a sec. But I'm like curious, and we can skip it if you don't feel like answering it tonight. But
okay,
like, because I know that you grew up religious, and I'm curious, like, if science offers a kind of like ontological certainty, so like a kind of like spiritual certainty about like there being like either answers or there being like uncertainty that is beyond human knowledge. Because I think science can also offer that kind of like thought as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious if there's anything there for you.
That's a good question. I would say that it's actually kind of the opposite. So like I grew up very religious, but my dad is also like the biggest nerd in the world. He
Yeah.
literally has like graphic novels about quantum physics. He like went out and bought these books. So he like loves science, and he's also very religious. So it's nothing that it didn't come into conflict as I was growing up.
Yeah.
But as I was, I feel like science has a lot of places where it isn't able to answer questions, especially in terms of these like big philosophical questions of like, well, like, why are we here, and what makes us us, and like, what is the universe, and how did the universe, whatever.
How did the universe, whatever.
How did the universe? It makes no sense. And I think like a lot of what religion taught me was like, especially in terms of faith, is just believing and trusting without like, and like accepting the fact that you won't get those answers.
Yeah.
And I think like having that experience growing up and learning about that growing up has made it easier for me to be okay with not having all these questions about the universe answered.
I love that. It makes you like a more patient scientist.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Oh, that's like a phenomenal answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I have one last question.
Just
for
one
you.
more.
Yeah.
Okay.
How would you like to play?
I think, I mean, this relates to science, but I think it also applies to a lot of different things that I think we're learning now that a lot of interesting things happen like at intersections of things, of categories, of boxes that we've made and grew up with. And so that applies to science. I think it's, I'm already doing that a little bit now with the SciComm Collective, but looking at science at the intersection of like arts and like society and like how those things can relate together. And like I was saying, using arts to express and communicate science in ways that we don't normally do. And I feel like that's playing with science a lot, of seeing how we can look at science in ways that we don't normally do. I think that's super interesting. And then I think also what we were talking about before of like breaking down these conventions of science. And being more open-minded about what can be considered science. Because now science, like we were saying, follows these very rigorous methods. And it can only be done by people who are in certain institutions and have funding from bigger organizations and that kind of stuff. But that's not everyone. And that's like a very privileged group of people. But that doesn't mean that science that's been done different ways by different people who don't have access to all of that money and those resources, that doesn't mean that it doesn't count as science. And I think that it would be interesting to be like more open to what we can consider as valid information.
Wow.
I think that applies to a lot to, especially like here, to indigenous knowledge that's been passed down, because especially that it's like so it's such like ancient knowledge, right? Like for sure it's been like rigorously like tested and changed and adapted. And also with a lot of like Asian medical practices and just knowledge in general. I think there's a lot of stuff there that is very quickly dismissed, but it would be super interesting to look into it more.
And also we're like, there are certain things that we're slowly coming to realize are like efficacious methods of either treatment or just like, you know, like Tibetan monks being able to control their body temperature, these crazy things. because I guess one thing that we haven't said yet, but which I'm sure you would agree with, is like that like scientific knowledge changes, right? So it's not like the knowledge that we have right now is like absolute truth just because we used a method that seems logical or follows a tradition that was developed before, and by like a very specific subset of people.
Exactly.
And like also used to inflict like a lot of violence. Yeah.
Because exactly the science that we know now and the way that it's done now has been determined by like a very small, narrow type group of people. And so it's definitely exclusive, I think, to a lot of other groups who have like equally interesting information that we don't know about. And like it would be so enriching, I think, to like open ourselves up to that kind of knowledge so that we could like I feel like they probably have so many other answers to questions that we don't even have.
Totally. Yeah, it's even like the questions themselves.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for opening up your knowledge to me.
Thank you
coming
for
over.
inviting me.
Yeah. I'm definitely
super nice.
gonna hang out with this duck and observe his behavior later.
Please tell me more.
My goggles.
Please tell me what you learned about this duck. Yeah, I'd love to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'll see you.
Bye, friends. Thanks for coming over. Ding! One word I like a lot and also happens to be Vian's favorite kind of tree is ginkgo. Gingko. I like it because it feels like a type of cat that's like really mischievous and definitely has stripes. Ding!